Okay, so no, it's just to know if I take this table.
Do you just want to give me a thumbs up when you're ready and I can begin? Okay. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone around the world. Welcome. My name is Philip Botter, and I will be moderating this session. I'm a researcher working with United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability. And first, I would like to open with opening remarks from our director, Professor Yume Yamaguchi, who will be joining us with a video message.
Distinguished guests, honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of the participants in this roundtable session. At COP26 in Glasgow last November, delegates recognized that climate education and empowerment have a more important role to play than ever in overcoming the climate crisis. The transition to carbon neutrality will require public awareness and engagement, as well as pursuing co-benefit and minimizing social and economic trade-offs between other SDGs. The higher education sector needs to step up in the essential role of innovating research-oriented solutions for climate transformation. Equally, higher education must drive the empowerment of young leaders and build the national capacities that are needed to implement the Paris Agreement. The international commitment to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to strive for 1.5 degrees. These capacities include a wide range of knowledge and skills whose development requires much more than ad hoc training. What is needed is systematic long-term capacity to effectively contribute to sustainable transformation toward carbon neutrality. UNUIAS is a research and postgraduate education institution dedicated to realizing a sustainable future for people and our planet. With its unique position as a bridge between UN agencies and higher education, our institute has played a key role in fostering transdisciplinary experts and future leaders on sustainable development and climate action. At COP26, we announced our commitment to establish a new postgraduate degree specialization on the Paris Agreement to be launched in autumn 2023. It will be the first of its kind to be offered by a UN organization. The goal is to educate students and experts from across the globe developing vital skills to bridge science and policy for transformative climate action. It will be delivered in close collaboration with development partners, governments, and leading academic institutions. Today's roundtable will discuss this initiative along with a variety of existing programs to empower young leaders for climate action. We will seek advice from member states and other potential partners to continue to develop and enhance these efforts. I very much hope that this event will further strengthen our partnerships and advance the global endeavor to accelerate the climate action. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. Please enjoy our roundtable discussion.
Now that we've heard from our director, I would like to invite project head and program head, Dr. Akio Takimoto, to give a brief overview of the project that we're proposing, looking at implementation of the Paris Treaty through higher education. Dr. Takimoto.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining physically and online to the event today. So I'm Akio Takimoto, Program Head of UNUIS. I am very happy to present our initiative focusing on the implementation of Paris Agreement. Then as one of the environmental experts working for UN agencies, so this is my first participation to UNESCO higher conference. I'm excited to have a communication with you. Thank you. So let me start my presentation. First of all, I'd like to introduce what UNU, United Nations University, is. It is a global system of research and training institutes coordinated by UNU Center based in Tokyo. As you can see, not only the headquarters institute in Tokyo, we have 14 institutes across the world. Then it's established in 1972. Then we serve a bridge between UN and the international academic community. Then our institute, Institute for Advanced Study of the Sustainability, is also based in Tokyo. Then we dedicate to realizing a sustainable future for people and our planet through policy-oriented research, education, and capacity development activities, focusing on sustainable science. In terms of a research area, we have 4 thematics. First of all, we are doing research on governance for sustainable development, currently focusing on a synergy between climate change and SDGs. The second one component is biodiversity and society. And third one is water resource management. The last one is innovation and education. That includes education for sustainable development project. And at the same time, our institute is promoting higher education program, postgraduate degree programs dealing with sustainability science. It's a unique function among UN agencies to provide a master course and PhD degree on sustainability to the students coming across the world. Currently, we invite 38 students in total. 50% of them study at the master course, and the other one is PhD, and well gender balance. They're coming from 20 countries, and out of which 76% from developing countries. Then we are relatively high rate for supporting students with scholarships, nearly 55%. And we have a strong partnership with university based in Japan, such as the University of Tokyo, through the programs such as credit exchange, double degree, and joint diplomats. So we have a solid function on the higher education as a UN, but based on the historic outcome of climate change conference in Glasgow, then there is our new initiative coming. So let me recap of the outcome. One of the most important things is all parties reconfirm to achieve the goal for keeping the global temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial level. And nearly 90% of economies committed to achieve the carbon neutrality in their nations to achieve the global goal. Then there's another aspect of the outcome is that all parties adopt the so-called rule book of the Paris Agreement. This is the first time since the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015 in Paris. So this means climate COP has shifted from negotiation to implementation stage. So as you imagine that implementation requires a huge amount of knowledge and know-how to promote their actions. So they need a capacity building, of course. Then, in addition, climate change is interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary nature. So they highlight the importance on between climate change and SDGs, other goals. Then the government itself cannot do everything. So the party acknowledges the importance of multi-stakeholder coalitions to address complicated matters such as phasing out coal or electrification in transportation sectors. And last but not least, all parties acknowledge the importance of education and empowerment for the young people. Okay. Then there are a lot of key elements on the Paris Agreement, but however, I would like to highlight one key element. This is so-called transparency and global stocktake system. Under the Paris Agreement, governments agreed to come together every 5 years to access the collective progress towards long-term goals, since long-term goal is created based on the century basis, quite long goals. So they need to recap that they check the progress of collective actions. So this is called global stocktake system. And also, based on the need, each country submits so-called national determined contribution. This is a document comprised of the national targets by 2030 or midterm targets and long-term target like 2050 targets. And the list of measures, means of implementation to achieve their national targets. And another important aspect is reporting of their policies at a regular basis. This is another important element. And also monitoring evaluation. So track progress towards their commitments under the agreement. This is very important. So some of you imagine the climate change is the issue on the science issues. So higher education plays a role to educate the people, to make students understand climate science. But from the context of the implementation of this agreement, they requires many kinds of knowledge and know-how, including administrative know-how, to promote their national policies in their countries. That has become a big issues for, in particular, developing countries. And so from this context, UNFCCC conventions organize a workshop inviting parties and experts to analyze what are the gaps and needs. And I sought out some important points. One of them is institutional capacity to sustain and improve the measuring, reporting, and invalidating system. Then there is findings that national reports are prepared on an ad hoc basis and didn't result in a permanent process in most developing countries. So there is a strong need to establish a permanent framework in the government. And there is a need to develop a dynamic training for technical experts. And another one is data collection. Data collection on climate-related information. This is also quite important. So there are a huge number of areas, including climate science and the impacts of climate change, the vulnerability in the country, and if there what kind of technology available, or future estimation of technological potential, and all kinds of information is required. And the other important aspect is coordination. Coordination across sectors and institutions to collect share data. So in many countries, there are lack of coordination mechanism in the government for data sharing. And so there's a need to formalize institutional arrangement for data provision and need to communicate to stakeholders, not have a discussion between the government, but they need to communicate with stakeholders. And also they need to improve horizontal, but also vertical coordination, communication between national and local governments. Okay, from this context, UNU made an announcement to launch postgraduate degree focusing on the Paris Agreement. So it was announced in Competencies Glasgow, as mentioned by our director. So let me introduce the update on the concept of the specialization on the Paris Agreement. So objective of this specialization to develop future leaders or practitioners who will implement actions for decarbonization and adaptation to climate change in a various positions of governments, private sector, and other stakeholders. So as a UN agency, it is open to candidates from all countries, but however, we would like to focus on the students coming from developing countries. Then we will establish the specialization under the current scheme, postgraduate degrees programs. So we will create both master course and doctor course. But we have been starting the development of the master course structure. Now we are currently considering to have a 30 credit for getting master course degree. Then that is comprised of 20 courseworks, 20 credit coursework, and 10 credit through thesis, dissertation, and non-thesis options, so-called practicum. In terms of coursework, as an example, we are wanting to establish these courses ranging from overview of UN Climate Change Convention and Paris Agreement and its history of negotiation. The second one is quite specific to the practitioners on Paris Agreement, dealing with transparency system, national planning, and measuring, reporting, validating system. The third one is also quite specific, teaching carbon market mechanisms such as emission trading schemes in the global, national, and regional basis. Then also, we will modify the current course dealing with synergy between climate change and SDGs, and the biodiversity food system, such as has a global and complex nature through the land use management. And also through the collaboration with University of Tokyo, we will provide a lecture regarding climate change science, some of them relevant to the Ipcc. Okay. Then as a practicum activity, we wonder if we could provide an opportunity for students to participate in a project of a partner government for developing a strategy or plan on the low carbon development or climate change adaptation to the impacts of climate. And another example is to participate in a project of a partner organization for enhancing capacity on the reporting system and giving a student opportunity for the student to present at the event or conference related to climate change sustainable development agenda. Then as a topic or research topic, we may consider to provide a student to study on integrated assessment model which is a model to predict future greenhouse gas emission scenarios, and carbon market, governance, and also nature-based solution on biodiversity and climate change. Okay, so thank you very much. So I acknowledge, as UNESCO family, I think such a specific matters focusing on climate change, or particularly climate change framework, is very specific, but I'm quite interested in exchange of views on this topic. So for further developing our program and to start autumn next year. Thank you very much for today's. We will organize discussion session for focusing on two topics. One is what are the required competencies, and second one is what is the ideal form of partnership. That will be moderated by my colleagues, Philip and Dr. Bolter, in the latter session. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Dr. Takemoto. So joining Dr. Takemoto will be 4 panelists with us here today, all with expertise working with education. 3 will be joining us online virtually, and 1, Mr. Laurent Cortez, will be with us here in person in Barcelona. So it's my pleasure to introduce these 4 panelists. First, I would like to introduce Ms. Won-Jung Boon from UNESCO. Ms. Boon works in UNESCO headquarters in the ESD section, where she is a focal point for ESD policy. Also joining with us is Dr. Kanako Morita from the Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute, who is a senior researcher at said institute, as well as a visiting researcher at UNU-IAS, as well as the National Institute for Environmental Studies. Their focus is on effective governance and financial mechanisms to enable sustainable development. Third, also joining us remotely, is Dr. Atsushi Sato, an expert at Mitsubishi UFJ Research and Consulting, who is working on greenhouse gas inventory preparation and reporting, especially in the land use sector. And joining us in person is Mr. Laurent Cortez, Deputy Head of Education, Vocational Training, and Employment and Higher Education Division of the French Agency for Development, who is working extensively in education and development programs, TVET, or technical and vocational education and training, and higher education in many countries, especially in Africa. So to start us off, perhaps I will ask Ms. Boon, could you please give us your thoughts on existing practices and challenge for climate action education, as well as capacity building in the context of UNESCO's ESD for 2030. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Won-Jung Boon. I'm a program specialist at UNESCO headquarters in the section of Education for Sustainable Development. Today I've prepared some slides to introduce to you the UNESCO's work on climate crisis and education. So UNESCO's work on climate education is in particular aimed at supporting member states and to advocate for climate change and role of education at global level by providing documents, relevant materials, and training and showcasing of good practices. In particular, our work is designed around this global framework on education for sustainable development for 2030, which was launched in 2020 for the period of 2020 to 2030. And this framework particularly aims to build a more just and sustainable world through education's role in achieving all of the 17 SDGs. And around also with the relevance in connection with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and also Paris Agreement and Glasgow Work Programme on Action for Climate Empowerment, climate education now needs to have a relook in order to move ahead to ensure that all learners acquire knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes to tackle climate change and sustainability challenges. But according to UNESCO's work, we have found that only half of national curricula in the world make reference to climate change, and only about 20% of the teachers actually have the competencies to deal with this. So our aim on the global picture is to make sure that all countries integrate climate change in their education policies by 2030, and all countries embed this in their curriculum and in schools. And in order to do that, we have these activities planned for the next 4 years, namely to say that it will be focused on greening education policies and greening every curriculum to ensure that climate change education is embedded, as well as to ensure that teachers are ready and schools are prepared with a whole school approach to education for sustainable development. And in this regard, there are some guidance documents and teaching and learning materials that could be also relevant for the trainees of this graduate program, but also for the wider community of climate change education. And finally, I would like to note the importance of higher education institutions in promoting ESD for 2030 and climate education, in particular in mainstreaming sustainability in all fields of study and research, but also to ensure that governance, facilities, and operation, living what you learn and learning what you live, is realized within and spearheaded by higher education institutions. And of course, community engagement and really connecting the knowledge with the practices and realities on the ground will be important. And in this regard, we feel that this very systematic capacity building on climate change is crucial to drive the whole of society change for post-carbon societies. And UNESCO, in this regard, heartily welcomes and fully supports UN University's new program, postgraduate degree program on specialization on Paris Agreement. I think this is a very timely opportunity to ensure that experts are coming from the higher education institutions to address this whole of society paradigm shift towards post-carbon societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Byun. Next, I'd like to ask the same question to Dr. Morita. What existing practices and challenges are there for climate change education or capacity building, specifically strengthening enabling conditions, such as including institutional capacity, multi-level governance, or nature-based solutions? Dr. Morita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry, my slides is... Can I see the slides?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Kanako Morita. I'm a climate governance and finance researcher, and I was a lead author of the IPCC, the sixth assessment, the current latest IPCC sixth assessment report. And I would like to briefly talk about the research needs on the climate governance. So first, I would like to talk about the background of the climate governance research. And as you know, there were two milestone events in 2015 related to climate change. One was the adoption of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including its Sustainable Development Goals. And this adoption raised awareness of the need of the transformation of societal systems, including political, economic, and knowledge and cultural systems, and to realize a sustainable society. And another thing was the adoption of the Paris Agreement, and it has raised awareness of the 1.5 degree target, which calls for the efforts to limit the global average temperature increase to 1.5 degree above pre-industrial levels. And then the latest IPCC report shows that the importance of the immediate and deep emissions reduction across all the sectors. And another background is that many countries and companies and financial institutions and local governments have pledged net zero emissions targets. And also the companies and financial institutions have made progress in addressing climate-related risk. This is because they started to realize the risks of the related to physical impacts of climate change, and also the risks related to the transition to lower carbon economy. And and based on this background, I would like to raise 3 research topics that are related to the climate governance, which is based on the IPCC new report. One is strengthening the enabling conditions for accelerating mitigation and also shifting development pathways towards sustainability. And these enabling conditions include finance, technological innovation, policy instruments, institutional capacity, multi-level governance, and changes in human behavior and lifestyle. So these much deeper understanding on these enabling conditions is also required. And second topic is about the multi-level governance. We need to consider more effective interaction among international, national, and subnational, including urban or community level institutions and actors. And cities, not only the international and national level, but also the cities and other urban areas are responsible for more than 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So emissions reduction mitigation across sector like energy, buildings, and transportation, land use, and also adaptation is very important at the city level as well. And third point, research topic is on the relations between climate change and other sustainable development goals. And it is necessary to enhance the synergy between climate change mitigation adaptation measures and other measures that achieve the sustainable development goals. And also it is important to minimize the trade-offs among the other sustainable development goals. And one of the example is about the biodiversity conservation. And one of the good example is about the nature-based solution that can contribute to both climate change and other sustainable development goals. And nature-based solutions address societal challenges like climate change, economic and social development, food security, water security, and provides human well-being and biodiversity benefits simultaneously. And so I raised these 3 research topics, but there are more research topics that need to address at the climate regarding to climate governance. And I think climate policy and science is becoming more complex. So I'm looking forward to discuss with you more about this climate change related education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morita. Now, to hear from Dr. Sato, what existing practices and challenges for climate change education do you think we need to work on, especially as it relates to transparency, monitoring, and perhaps greenhouse gas inventory? The floor is yours.
Hello, this is Atsushi Sato. I have been working in the area of MRV more than 20 years, and I also was the author of the IPCC methodological report prepared in the 2019. So today I will present a short presentation, which focused on what is needed for the transparency and the MRV and GHG inventory preparation. So as you can imagine, the GHG emissions and removals are the essential data for all. So to know what is happening and to know what we should do. There are several ways to capture the GHG emission removals situations, including GHG inventory or global modeling or remote sensing techniques. But the GHG inventory is, I think, the very good source to know the GHG emission removals. Because doing global models or remote sensing need very high techniques, so only the scientists or specialists can do it. But for GHG inventory, the fundamental and the methodological information is given by the IPCC guidelines, IPCC, and which aim to allow everyone can do in the different data level or different knowledge level. And GHG inventory is a bottom-up data, so we can know the profile of the GHG emissions removals, so that we can design where and what and how much policy and measures or action is needed to tackle climate change. But to prepare the GHG estimations, at least 4 areas are needed to study. The first one is the Ipcc Guidelines. This is the methodological guidance providing the method how to calculate GHG emissions and removals. And usually the calculation is done by the specialists and the scientists, supported by scientists. But also the government officials should know the overview of the sectors and the source and sinks. And the second one is the UNFCCC MRV rules. And this is a common rule how to report and how to ensure comparability among the party of the UNFCCC. So this is a quite the basic and fundamental rules for everybody. And this is usually understood by the government officials and also inventory compilers. That if there is no experts in the national level, so the country cannot achieve the UNFCCC requirement. And the third point I should make is the institutional arrangements. So the GHG data covers every sector, every economic sector. So there are a lot of stakeholders who know the knowledge and who have the data. So we have to design the system to enabling estimations by the country level. And the fourth point is the relationship between target or contribution. So as you know, all countries prepared the nationally determined contribution. So it's similar to the emission reduction target. But to make that, we need to know how much GHG emissions are emitted, or which sector is the main source of the country, and to know where we have the potential to reduce emissions. So the whole area in this slide needs to be educated. So and there are some lesson learned from the past experience. So for the developed countries, we have the system of the annual GHG annual submission of the reporting of the GHG inventory, and also there are very strict MRV rules and national system rules. So that the all developed country needs to bring up own specialists, and also we need to prepare the functional national systems. And there's sometimes a problem that the trained specialists have left their position and gone, but there are many chances to follow up for new stuff. In the case of developing countries, the reporting requirement is not annually, so the UNFCCC negotiation decides the timing of the submission. So only the ad hoc submission is done. And also it is allowed to use very old method. For instance, the 1990 Ipcc Guidelines method are still okay to report under the current system up to the 2022 submissions. So that sometimes the developing country hire the consultants and they prepare the inventory or report, but they leave and no archives and no staff knows the past. So it is very hard to make the continuous national system for sometimes. And there are also the problem that trained compilers often change the job, but there's less chance to follow up. So I have seen many cases that the national knowledge turn to near zero again, and we start from zero again. And also the sometimes developing countries' government officials doesn't know very well about the UNSC negotiation, so that they couldn't actively negotiate it in the negotiation. So it's makes worse situation for picking up the developing countries' real opinion in the negotiation routes. So the word of the Paris Agreement, you know that we all countries have the NDC, and all countries follow the common and continuous MRV rules. But we have the flexibility for the developing countries. And we don't have any top-down targets. So every country can make their own target, but they need to explain transparently. And also the accountability is quite important. So it is necessary to explain the transparently and give accountability by parties quickly and variables. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zhou. All right, Mr. Cortez, the floor is yours. What existing practices and challenges for climate change education exist in the mind of France's policy for development, maybe particularly in some of the nations you're currently working with?
Thank you very much. I just saw that there is a translation system, so I'm going to switch in French, if it's possible. Bonjour.
Good morning, everyone. Well, in fact, I wanted to present what the French Development Agency is doing in the educational system. And we are active in many different countries. And we help different governments to set up their educational policies, which will take account inter alia of climatic and environmental issues. We work with many different partners in the different countries where we are active, with UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank, and other partners. And we attempt to ensure that countries have all the human and financial resources they need to develop their policies. What's very important, we talk a lot about higher education, but in fact, higher education is the result, the product of the whole rest of the educational system. Secondary education, and it's very important to have a holistic approach and to ensure that climate issues be taken into account throughout the educational system, because otherwise when you get to higher learning, higher education, it's too late. So one very important issue concerns science teaching, and we see very often in science teaching, once we get to the higher education level, the stock of science people is not enough, and we need to call on external consultants, as some other colleagues have already said, to apply these policies to protect the environment. And what we see is that environmental policies which are set up in educational systems try to do several things. First of all, to meet a need for certain skills, because there are new jobs which will be created, green jobs as we call them, and in these areas certain skills are needed, and all educational systems should be able to meet that need. We'll discuss that further later, perhaps. Another goal, which is also very important, and this really has to do with higher education, is to work on innovation, to push the envelope a bit and identify new techniques so as to be able to set forth these environmental transition strategies. And then perhaps the most complicated thing, and earlier speakers have touched on this as well, is to change behavior, And in order to do this, we need to show how important this issue of climate change, of the environment is. Children need to understand this clearly so that when they get to higher education, they can take proper account of this. Now, we talk a lot, of course, about climate, but we're not only dealing with climate and the environment. There's biodiversity, for instance, which we talked about earlier, which is also closely linked to this. And so this is something I believe we see in the definition of educational policy. There are several different difficulties we come up against here. First of all, to see what is the best method to reach a broad audience, going from primary school to higher education, how to speak to children so that they can decide and understand, and when they go home, they can talk to their parents, because for us, it's a bit too late. We've already left school. And so I think that's something which is truly important. And another point which I think goes back to higher education is the teacher training, which in many countries is part of higher education. And it's extremely important, we talked about coordination just now, to ensure that there is coordination between ministries in charge of higher education and national education, so as to guarantee that curricula, training programs for teachers that are set forth in higher education take account of these issues and also correspond closely to the expectations of students at a much lower level. And this is something which is both very important and very difficult, and which, to my way of thinking, is not yet very effective and that we all need to work on together. This is a typical research subject, I think, how to have consciousness raising, how to get everyone to wake up a bit dealing with these issues, and I think the key to this is children. And one last thing on these matters. I think we've talked a lot about the energy transition, the environmental transition, but we mustn't forget that what we want is a fair transition, which is to say that behind all of this, we can have the necessary skills, we can manage to find the skills, the financial resources, so as to have an environmental transition in a country, which means the country manages to develop the sectors which are necessary for this energy transition. But the problem is that the burden will tend to fall on the shoulders of the poorest, and the poorest are those who are the most heavily impacted. On the one hand, these are the people who the most often see an increase in prices stemming from these transitions. Their purchasing power shrinks. And then on the other hand, since they tend to be fairly far away from the educational system and are not so aware of future interesting jobs, they also happen often to miss opportunities which exist. So it's a double penalty. On the one hand, for the poorest people, a lower purchasing power, which limits their possibilities severely, but then on the other hand, not to have the skills which would allow them to have access to the new jobs being created and hence to become more prosperous. And this is something which we can and must deal with in the context of the school system, from primary school all the way up to higher education, in order to ensure that the poorer sectors of society can also have access to higher learning. And that means that they also have the possibility to have high-quality secondary school training. And these are things which I think must be taken into account so as to have a fair transition. I tried to be as brief as I could. Thank you.
Mr. Cortes. So we'll now be moving to the discussion section of this program. So I'm going to take a seat. Just do a quick mic check. Is that okay? Great. All right. So now moving from a little bit of Q&A and introduction into discussion, I'd like to ask all of the panelists, including Dr. Takemoto, what are the required competencies in order to implement the Paris Agreement at the national level? So think a little bit about who should be the beneficiary learners. Are we just focusing on youth? Do we need to focus on adult learners? What areas of the workforce? What about those retired and who are living longer and longer lives and are still consuming? And maybe in addition to this, what particular learning activities do we need to support to achieve these competencies? So Dr. Takemoto, maybe I'll start with you, okay. If you don't mind, and then proceed.
Thank you, Mrs. So there are
lots of points to be addressed on the competency to promote, to lead the country to promote the Paris Agreement and climate change actions. As mentioned by many speakers, including Mr. Cortez, this is a really, climate change is a really nature of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. So it's not enough to have a knowledge just on the climate change issues. They have to understand the complexity between climate change and other environmental issues, such as biodiversity, land degradation. At the same time, they also understand the complex system between climate change and other social and economic aspects, such as poverty, job creation, and energy access and others. So there's a long way to go. So then such a person needs wide range of knowledge and networking and communication capacity. So now I fully agree to all speakers, and particularly Mr. Cortez, importance of starting an education in early stage from primary and secondary education. So UNU with advantage in promoting education, higher education. But so now I acknowledge that we need to connect the education, higher education, and education to the high school students. So we need to invent an innovative way to provide continuous and long-term education and capacity building activities. So yes, I will provide additional comments if I have. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Mr. Cortez, maybe hearing from you next, what competencies do you think we need to be stressing and to who as we look at training to implement the Paris Agreement?
Thank you. Je pense.
I think that, in fact, there isn't an answer to this question because it's something that has to be put into its context. We see that what we do, in particular with professional training, but also in higher education, show that if we want to meet these needs for skills, competencies, we need to be sure of two or three things. First of all, to ensure that the educational system is not working on its own, that it's not proposing some form of training based on idea they know better than others what's necessary and that they're going to try to anticipate meeting specific needs. The problem then is that we have graduates who are unemployed. The answer is to encourage dialogue with the private sector, the productive sector, to see that firms have their word to say in the definition of these training programs. And we see it's not always very easy for them to say that human resources department will need, I need these people with these skills. If we want to really try to forecast, that's a complicated task and something that does happen. We need to see that this public-private partnership approach between universities, whether they be public or private, and the working world, firms, companies, can ensure that the needs, the demand for certain skills are met, that we have the necessary capacity building. Another important thing is to have local or territorial approaches with universities that are part of a local context. What we often see is that needs for certain skills sometimes exist for a whole country are national, but sometimes there are very local needs. And what we see is that in some areas, we work quite a lot with centers for professional training in different productive sectors, which will create links with some universities or research bodies. And what we need then is to have an integrated approach where all of these different training bodies can meet specific needs on the labor market. And that requires a lot of coordination. And it is something which, and I also wanted to say this, we often talk about masters and PhDs, but in fact, the need is also to have highly qualified work people and highly qualified technicians in many countries, and that's very important as well. And it's important, I think, also to create this link with universities so that universities also train engineers, for instance, who are able to work with these technicians. So here, once again, this is just to say that we cannot, I think, isolate the sector of higher learning. We have to look at all of the different areas of education and all of the different skills that need to be learned. And that is complicated, especially when we're dealing with climate issues. Here, countries need to define a climate policy and the path they want to follow to see if we want, for instance, to work more on issues of adaptation. There are many countries which are developing adaptation activities in construction to make sure that buildings are properly equipped to be energy efficient, for instance. This is something quite important. That is basically what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Byun from UNESCO, perhaps the same question. What competencies do we need to be stressing, and who do we need to be stressing them to in order to actually get at climate action in education?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Just to first of all address the second question, which is slightly simpler. I would second what Dr. Takemoto had said about the importance of lifelong learning approach, starting from early childhood to adult learning. So this learning has to approach all levels, especially in the view that climate change is a moving target in a way that we are dealing with new challenges every day. And secondly, in regards to the key competencies, in order to really empower learners with knowledge, awareness, skills, and values, it entails a whole of transformation in teaching and learning. And we need to strike a new balance between cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral dimensions of learning. According to UNESCO's review, we find that knowledge and thinking competencies on climate change, including climate science, is relatively widely understood and practiced. However, this needs to go further in order to develop systems thinking competencies to understand this whole of intricate relationality between humans and the nature. But knowing isn't enough. Social-emotional domain, including social competencies that enable learners to collaborate together, negotiate and communicate to promote sustainable development, as well as self-reflection competencies and normative competencies on core values of sustainability are really essential. And finally, I think action competencies, including problem solving and strategic competencies to tackle complex sustainability problems are very much in demand in order to encourage for experiential and action-based learning. So this sort of holistic, balanced way is important. And in this regard, I think in terms of the learning activities, I found that Dr. Takemoto's presentation of the UNU's new program clearly shows the systems approach to climate issue with very much the technical integrity and practical project-based learning. So this is very much to be welcomed. And just to add, and seconding what Mr. Cortez mentioned about just transition, one small suggestion that I would have to complement is to ensure that we need to think about social emotional dimension of learning, and in order to make sure that these graduates out of the program become experts in the Paris Agreement, but also see themselves as activists in this fundamental paradigm shift of our societies towards 1.5 degree goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps now turning to Dr. Morita, what competencies do you think that we need to be stressing, and who needs to be engaged with these competencies?
Yes, so it's the same questions, right? The beneficially learners, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we didn't have a translation, so maybe my comments is somehow overlap. But yes, so the beneficially learners, I think, yeah, of course, youth education is important. But as I mentioned in my slide, the many not only the countries but also the companies and financial institutions, local governments are pledging net zero, and those actors are also willing to learn more about the climate change issues. So I think we need to involve, we need to think about the education at not only the youth level but also those actors. And also as for the competencies, there are a lot of things, but I would like to highlight that not only about the practical knowledge from the UNFCCC decisions, but also I think when the people, when we think about the policies and policy at the different governance levels, I think learning social science is also very important to understand. I think Dr. Takemoto mentioned about a lot of different elements like financial mechanism, MRV. There are a lot of elements that we need to study, but we need to learn how these are linked together. So, so by learning the social science, we can understand more, understand how we can transform these societal systems by understanding the linkage of the whole entities, different entities and the factors. And also social science can help to understand how we can enhance the human and also the actors' behavior changes. And also we need to think about the coherent, when you think about the policy instruments or economic instruments, we need to think about the alignment or coherence of the policies. Like, for example, in the Ipcc report, we had a lot of discussion on the coherence of the policy and climate change, alignment of the climate change policies and non-climate change policies. Like, for example, not about the policy that support the other sustainable development goals, but also the non-climate policy includes the which support the fossil fuel related activities. So, so yes, I think the education requires more to understand the whole picture of the climate policy and science, and also we need more people to bridge the science, climate science and policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps now, Dr. Sato, to you, what competencies do we need to be stressing and who do we need to be stressing them to when we talk about climate action?
Thank you very much. I would like to point three things in terms of the questions. So the competency we need to implement Paris Agreement includes the experts, the existing of experts in many areas. For instance, the environment scientists needed, or policy planning specialists and the government officials are also needed. Inventory compilers are necessary, or the expert of the forestry or expert of waste management, and every level of expert are needed to implement. And also, if we do it by the national level, the focal point ability is quite important to functional national system to implement the Paris Agreement. And also the third point, the social acceptance of tackling climate change is also important. And for the third point, we need to have a chance to educate in the many levels, from the elementary school to the college level or the high education level. But I think the course of United Nations University can be beneficial for the expert or national focal point, the candidate, which may include the government officials or inventory compilers and also potential politicians to make a leadership for the climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have a little bit of time left in this discussion, so maybe I'll reiterate and ask for maybe a one-sentence answer from each of the discussants. What activities would you stress? So we've talked about what competencies we need and who we need to target. What's an actual learning activity you would recommend? And if you could keep your answers succinct, we'll stay on time. So thank you so much. So maybe Dr. Takimoto, what's an activity?
Okay. Yes. Comes to mind is to provide a student to have an opportunity to work together with people working in different focal areas, such as a group engaged in the poverty support or development operation in water management, or people supporting creating green job in developing countries. Through such experience, then of course it takes time, but that will provide a big impact for students, young people, on the importance of communication and understanding of the people in different fields. So, so I would be happy that our new specialization policy agreement will provide an opportunity on the through the practicum, then doing this initiative for longer years, then we'll be able to establish quite a number of group who can lead the climate action and SDGs in various fields in many countries. So yes, this is, as asked, this is, I think such an activity would be maybe efficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez, what activities do you think we need? Maybe just one example.
Yeah. C'est une question.
Well, yes, this is a very difficult question. This is a difficult question, but for your institution, indeed, I think we need to focus on training that allows for a multi-sectoral vision, so that students, when they've completed that, they're able to adapt. They're able to go to talk to employers, go and talk to other ministries to facilitate the implementation of policies, because we do need a kind of maestro, someone who can guide everybody. And also they need to be able to communicate. They really need to be able to communicate to convey the importance of the issue, but on a scientific basis, of course. That's what I think is very important.
Thank you. Ms. Byun, what do you think is an activity that works well for inspiring climate action?
So coming also connected with my earlier response on the competencies, I would say an activity that connects mind, heart, and hands would be important. And here I would like to just refer to one of the learning activities suggested in UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development Goals Guide, which is to suggest that we could develop an activity, an inquiry-based project investigating the statement, those who cause the most damage to the atmosphere should pay, from perspectives of diverse members of the society. So these kind of inquiry-based projects could allow for holistic understanding of environmental, but also social and economic aspects of climate change and its impact. And that kind of holistic thinking around core questions could be an important part of the learning activities.
Thank you. Dr. Morita, to you, what's an activity you think learners need to engage with in order to really master climate action?
Yes, Yeah, I'm not an education expert, but I just want to raise one example that may be important especially for youth. Because of this COVID-19, we cannot travel a lot. So I feel that a lot of youth people have no chance to learn a lot about what's happening outside their countries. So, and I think the view of the government is also looking focus more on their own domestic issue. So I think it is more important to, climate change is a global issue. So I want to, I think it's good to have some programs to understand, learn what is happening outside their own countries, and maybe through. At this moment, maybe through online, but I think, it will be good for youth generation.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Sato, what activities do you think would be useful for the fields of competencies that we need in looking at climate action?
I think the climate change is quite wide. The issues relating to the many areas and many issues. So I think to give the opportunity to study such a wide issues and to help the people who are around the climate change issue can find their interested area or to give the vision what they want to be, for instance, to be a journalist of the climate change or to be a specialist of some specific area of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are right on time, so thank you to all my panelists. This is a pleasure to work with. Our second discussion question. So we've talked about activities, competencies, and audiences. Now we get to the part of partnership. So what is the ideal form of partnership to successfully deliver a climate action program that actually implements Paris, not just talks about it? So we talk about co-development of courses between universities. Do we also need to bring in NGOs? What about indigenous people on the ground who've been working with some of these land-based systems for generations? And what modalities are we doing these programs in? So are we delivering lectures? How are we supporting the research? A lot of you in your answers on activities gave more project than lecture-based examples. So that's really interesting. So perhaps I'll turn the mic back to Dr. Takemoto and ask, what kind of partnership will be successful in delivering this program? Who do we work with and to what effect?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Let me recap. From my, I present about the current postgraduate degree program under the UNIIS. We have not a big program. This is just 40 students are learning in our institute. But on the other hand, we have a fairly extensive network with other academic communities, such as university based in Japan and other EU institutes across the world. Utilizing this network, we have a joint degree or exchange credit system. Then, and also our instructor, some of our instructors are cross appointment with other universities. So we can utilize an advantage of such advantage for the climate change specialization. And in addition to the collaboration with academic institute, I think for implementing this project, I think it is also important to establish partnership with other organizations, such as development organizations like French development agencies or Japanese international cooperation agencies and others, since they are doing their own development cooperation projects for capacity building of experts on climate climate in the developing countries. So if we can establish a partnership with such an organization, maybe we may have a chance to invite the experts working for the government in the partner countries. Then under such a partnership, we can, develop human resource in a more, systematic way than to in the near future. Then people who graduate the course can go back to the countries, and then that would be a real, not ad hoc. That then we can. It's a permanent basis. They can, we can support such countries by providing the real quality experts who can have a capacity to come up with a new innovative plan and strategy on the climate change and associated with other sustainable development goals, and also who can capacity with coordination with other ministries and also the local government. So I hope that we can, UNU can contribute to establishment such a permanent education training system for the developing countries. Thank you.
Mr. Cortez, perhaps your perspective from a development agency. Who do we need to be working with for program implementation?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We finance a lot of partnerships between universities, between universities on a continental level, but also between continents, because those partnerships make it possible to improve training content. So we know, for example, a lot of institutes in those countries, in the countries of our interventions, and perhaps we can help you to identify students who might participate in your programs, and I think that would be very useful. In any case, we can help you to find out more about those in the countries we intervene in. Something else that's important is that we all tend to work among ourselves with people who think the same thing. That's frequently the case. And that really doesn't advance things. It's comforting, but it's not necessarily the most productive way of working. So I think it might be a good idea to set up partnerships that force students to face or meet people who don't think the same way they do, which will force them to look at their arguments and review them. It's important to develop soft skills, as a speaker said earlier, but we also need to meet different people. So if it's just university partnerships with the same training programs, everybody's going to agree. And from that point of view, I think it's going to lack a certain something. So we need to establish partnerships. Obviously, it's important to have partnerships with companies so that people go outside their comfort zone. And then when they become decision makers, those people will be able to talk to those different partners who might not think in the wrong way, but they see things in a different way. So that's very important. Nevertheless, we're willing and ready to work with you in order to establish a network of experts and then also put you into contact with potential students in our different countries of intervention.
Thank you. Some really interesting insights from everyone so far. So maybe now to UNESCO. Juan, who should we be partnering with and what partnerships are effective?
Thank you, Philip. I think I would concur also with what Mr. Takemoto and Mr. Cortez has said, that to complement what is already prepared and presented by Dr. Takemoto earlier, I think partnership with civil society organizations and local level authorities and communities would be valuable for this program. Ultimately, the graduates of this program will be trained to become national and global level experts on Paris Agreement. But also it's important to understand, for them to understand the real life impact of climate change at micro level, and to build these social, emotional, and action competencies to fully capture the nuances of this issue on the ground. So this is particularly relevant, especially in the case of climate adaptation, because developing contextualized strategies that works on the ground will be crucial, and what works in one country or one region may not work in others. So, and in terms of the modality of the delivery, participatory learning and research opportunities within this diverse context will be valuable in terms of to enhance the quality and relevance of the program. So I would suggest a couple of examples, perhaps, for example, co-developing courses with regional and local level partners with local authorities to participate at local level strategy building in diverse contexts would be interesting. This would bring the breadth of such experiential learning and also have an opportunity for students to interact with those who may not support climate action, as Mr. Cortez just mentioned. So this would be particularly also in line with UNU's strength, because it has a vast network of local level actions, including regional centers of expertise. And secondly, I would say one possibility is also to partner with civil society to include courses and research on the human impact of climate change to understand the complex nature of this issue in connection with issues like gender, climate justice, and alternative economic structures. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Morita, what partnerships do you think are critical as we look to design content and coursework for climate action?
Yes, I think it's important to that the students can learn the multi-stakeholders, the different views from the different stakeholders, and so yes, the local government and also the financial institution, companies, and government have a different view. So I think it will be good to understand. To have that kind of opportunity. And another thing that I have been doing for 8 years is I have been teaching the climate negotiation role play at the different university, and that is quite popular from students. And so I ask each students to become a representative of each different countries, and like especially for example, developing country represent developed countries, and they will understand why developed countries are their views, and also the opposite, the developed countries students can understand developing countries' views, and they understand how difficult to make a consensus at the climate negotiation. And also we did some negotiation using the SDGs example, and I asked all students to become a minister, and then we made a SDG related declaration, and that is also very difficult, but that was very good for students to learn each goals and from the different countries' views. So I think that kind of activities also will be helpful for students to understand more about climate change and also sustainable development.
Thank you. Some role-playing is very interesting. Dr. Sato, what partnerships do you want to emphasize?
Yes, thank you very much. Based on my experience, once we have a job, it is very hard to find time to study everything. So the climate change is quite wide and diverse issue. So I also want to study the climate change or the background of the Paris Agreement, but it's sometimes hard to find the time. So I think it is important to cover everything of the Paris Agreement contents in the course. And it is a very good opportunity and a good chance to have a chance to holistic studying of the Paris Agreement. I think in the only a few people knows the very wide view of the understanding of the Paris Agreement. And I also agree with the role playing is good and the variable to do. I think only not only to study, but also to trial do. It's quite effective to learn and to implement the Paris Agreement implementation when they return to countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so we're wrapping up our discussion program, and thankfully we have a little bit of time left for questions from the floor. So we have about 5 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions. Yes, you in the back. You'll be handed a microphone. And if you could keep your question to who you'd like to address it, everyone or specifically.
You had the question, yes. Sorry. Hi, is it working?
Yes, it's working fine.
Hi, my name is Danielle. I'm part of the UNESCO team in the Higher Education International Institute, and previously I was also working at the UNFCCC, so of course I'm very much interested in the topic. I wanted to make a quick question to Professor I was positively surprised that you have this postgraduate course specifically for the Paris Agreement. Although I think it's a very good idea, I think we need this kind of, let's say, knowledge in all the courses, right? Not only a specific course for that. Of course, I understand some students want to follow career in that direction. They will take this course. But I think this is the kind of discussions that we need in other subjects. Engineering students, law students, future doctors, everyone should be discussing about that. So how do you think we can, because often they have courses like about sustainability, or very general courses, right? And not often they discuss about the agreement per se. So how do you think we could, how do you think this could be included in other higher education disciplines, you know? So we are a little bit not only talking to the sustainability students, but other students from other disciplines can also be discussing about that. How do you think this could be implemented? Yeah.
Sure. So perhaps I'll ask if anyone on the panel would like to reply. So
I think it was a question for Professor.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm pleased that you're engaged in a climate change convention. Yes, correct. So the reason why we named this program as Specialized in Paris Agreement is one of the main purposes to pay attention by stakeholders. But in reality, you know, Paris Agreement cannot be implemented or realized to achieve the goal just by the efforts in a closed circle, of course. Now we require the whole stakeholders, any entities, to implement their own climate change action in partnership with each other. So this is not an issue of just government, but also private companies and academias, civil society, and all kinds of entities need to collaborate with each other. So you're right. So we would like to design this program so that students can learn on the importance of the action taken by any kinds of entities, not only the government, public, but also private sectors, and the role of people outside the climate communities, as mentioned by many speakers. So we will, yes, we try to develop curriculum so to allow the students to
learn the importance of the collaboration with other sectors, as well as have a chance to work with their partners engaged in other social and economic sectors. So thank you very much. Anyway, we are just in the middle of discussion for designing the program. So your advice be very appreciated. So we'll be updated in the later stage. Thank you very much.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you so much for everyone who's attended, both virtually and in person. The three of us will still be up here to answer some additional questions, perhaps if you catch us. But I would like to say a special thank you to our online panelists joining us from France and Japan, as well as stress that the implementation continues. So as Dr. Takemoto just said, we're in the early stages of implementing. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. And again, thank you for being here today and for your attention to what higher ed can do for implementation of the Paris Treaty. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.